My name is Paul Vallone. You are listening to 106.7 Wilmington's Big Talker. I'd like to welcome you to Guns, Politics, and Freedom, where each Saturday at 1 p.m. and each Sunday at 5 p.m. we give you the ammunition to better defend your gun rights. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at hyattguns.com. In case you aren't familiar with me, I direct Grassroots North Carolina, or GRNC, since 1994, our state's most effective gun rights organization. As its director, I was involved in drafting and passing our original concealed handgun law. Since then, GRNC has gone on to engineer passage of concealed handgun reciprocity, our purchase permit bypass, castle doctrine and stand your ground, the expansion of concealed carry into state and municipal parks, restaurants, public assemblies, educational properties, and much more. Grassroots North Carolina is exactly what the name implies, a grassroots collection of volunteers from all walks of life who share a common concern that our constitutionally guaranteed freedoms are being eroded. Check us out at grnc.org. That's grnc.org. Welcome to day 158 of the attack on America from within. Last month, both Joe Biden and his freedom-hating Attorney General, Merrick Garland, held a press conference promising to attack your Second Amendment freedoms. And since then, they have been delivering on that promise. First, there was the nomination of rabidly anti-gun leftist David Chipman to head the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, who, in his first confirmation hearing, expressed the desire to ban not only what the left commonly construes as assault weapons, but in fact every semi-automatic rifle in America over .22 caliber, whose confirmation hearings will resume in coming days, and whose confirmation you need to oppose, and I will tell you how to do that shortly. Next came the notice of proposed rulemaking from the ATF, which claims to regulate personally made firearms, which incidentally have been legal since the inception of our republic, but which would actually regulate parts of firearms, like, for example, the upper receivers of AR-15 type firearms, creating a nightmare for gun owners across the country. And most recently, just this week, came the ATF's proposal to ban virtually all of the millions of AR-15 type pistols in the U.S., creating a quagmire of regulations, making it nearly impossible to determine whether guns you own are legal or not, and requiring those millions of gun owners to either render the guns inoperable in their present form, register them with the ATF under the ridiculously convoluted and difficult National Firearms Act as short-barreled rifles, or either destroy them or turn them in. Bear in mind that all of this is being done not by legislation but by regulatory fiat, as King Biden bypasses the legislative process enshrined in our Constitution and instead uses his Department of Injustice to dictate what you may own like a third-world despot. In this episode, we will discuss all of those, plus, more importantly, what you can do to stop them. But first, this just in gun rights news. In North Carolina, we have good news. Having passed the legislature, Senate Bill 43, Protect Religious Meeting Places, has been presented to Democrat Governor Roy Cooper, who now has the option of signing it, vetoing it, or simply doing nothing, in which case it will become law after 10 days. SB 43 will allow concealed handgun permit holders to protect themselves in churches which sponsor schools, just as they may currently do in churches without schools. If Cooper vetoes the bill, things will get a little dicey. Although enough Democrats have voted in favor of the bill to make up the 3/5 majority needed to override a veto, in 2020, when Cooper vetoed a similar bill, several Democrats who had initially voted for it changed their position to support Cooper's veto rather than going against their party, and ultimately the bill failed. We know Cooper doesn't believe in the right to keep and bear arms. The question is whether he cares about protecting churchgoers from the violent sociopaths who increasingly attack churches, synagogues, and mosques. No reasonable person can argue that armed parishioners can't stop mass shootings. It's occurred repeatedly, most recently in a Texas church where 71-year-old Jack Wilson stopped a murderous rampage by delivering a single shot to the head of the attacker. Before that, in Sutherland Springs, Stephen Williford stopped a similar active shooter by shooting him with an AR-15. And in 2007, armed parishioner Gene Assam shot an active killer at New Life Church in Colorado Springs. Moreover, no reasonable person could claim that armed parishioners represent a threat. Concealed handgun permit holders have been carrying in North Carolina churches without incident since 1995. So immediately contact Governor Cooper and tell him to do the right thing. This isn't about guns. It's about stopping murderous rampages in religious meeting places of all faiths. If Cooper vetoes the bill and a church shooting happens in North Carolina, victims' blood will be on his hands. You can find the alert at grnc.org. Go ahead and contact Governor Cooper. Elsewhere, the race for the open seat, which will be created by the retirement of Senator Richard Burr, is heating up. So far, the frontrunners for the Republican nomination seem to be former Governor Pat McCrory, former Congressman Mark Walker, and sitting Congressman Ted Budd. Lara Trump, who was widely conjectured as likely to run, has bowed out. Significantly, former President Donald Trump, speaking last week at the North Carolina GOP convention, endorsed Budd, further saying he would not support McCrory. Speaking about McCrory, Trump said, and I quote, "You can't pick people who have already lost 2 races and do not stand for our values." And that fairly neatly describes McCrory, who sought the support of gun voters, but in 2013, when facing House Bill 937, an omnibus bill containing a repeal of the Jim Crow-era pistol purchase permit law, threatened to veto the bill unless the repeal was removed, which it was. Translated, all the people being denied purchase permits by jokers like Wake County Sheriff Gerald Baker have McCrory to thank. We could do worse than Walker, who seems to espouse conservative pro-Second Amendment values, but who seems to be something of a politician. So far, the standout candidate for the Republican nomination seems to be Ted Budd, who, in addition to representing North Carolina in Congress, owns a gun shop. More on this as it develops. Now, this just in from North Carolina's own little Portland, namely Asheville. It seems that under Asheville's leftist city government, so many police have quit that Asheville police will no longer be able to respond to a rather lengthy list of reported crimes. Having now lost 84 police officers thanks to the defund movement, they will no longer be able to respond to 911 calls, including, among other things, theft from a vehicle, damage to property or graffiti, harassing phone calls, fraud, scams, identity theft, simple assault, and trespassing. This, of course, is after the Asheville City Council last year slashed $770,000 from its police budget, which, according to Britain's Daily Mail, you have to go to Britain now to get accurate renditions of things the leftist media refuses to report. The Daily Mail reported that it's resulted in an attrition rate of police officers roughly 6 times what it was prior to starting the defund movement. Said Police Chief David Zack to the Asheville City Council, and I quote, "This is what it looks like when you lose 50% of your detectives." And how is this working for our own little Portland? Well, according to the publication 24/7 Wall Street, Little Asheville now has one of the highest overall crime rates of any U.S. city. Specifically, 159% higher than the rest of North Carolina. Better yet, in 2020, murders in Asheville nearly doubled from the previous year. In 2020, 45 people were shot, 57 were stabbed, and 652 made emergency calls for shootings. Not too shabby for a city of only 93,000 people. No wonder that little leftist Asheville now ranks among the 10% most violent cities in America. Must be all the guns. And don't expect things in Asheville to improve anytime soon. The City Council just presented a budget which not only freezes APD funding at present levels, but also, and I quote, reallocates funds to different places within the department. Said Asheville Mayor Esther Manheimer, and I quote, "This year's budget reflects the promise to reimagine public safety." I guess Asheville residents should reimagine how they will be raped, robbed, and murdered. But never fear, all that money being reimagined away from law enforcement is going to a much better use. As I write this, just moments ago, news came in that Asheville authorized $2.1 million to pay for reparations for slavery. This, Mayor Mannheim assures us, is a monumental moment. You're listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker. We're going to take a short break, after which we will return to discuss looming federal threats to your gun rights. My name is Paul Ballone. You're listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on Wilmington's Big Talker. Our show is sponsored by Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at hyattguns.com. Well, we've got some good news from, believe it or not, California, where a federal judge has struck down the state's so-called assault weapon ban as unconstitutional. U.S. District Judge Roger Benitez, a George Bush appointee, wrote a 94-page ruling in Miller v. Bonta, which begins by saying, and I quote, "Like the Swiss Army knife, the popular AR-15 rifle is a perfect combination of home defense weapon and homeland defense equipment. Good for both home and battle, the AR-15 is the kind of versatile gun that lies at the intersection of the kinds of firearms protected under District of Columbia versus Heller. Yet, the state of California makes it a crime to have an AR-15 type rifle. Therefore, this court declares the California statutes to be unconstitutional." Benitez said California's law, quote, "bans an entire class of very popular hardware, firearms that are lawful under federal law and under the laws of most states and that are commonly held by law-abiding citizens for lawful purposes," adding that, and I quote, "under no level of heightened scrutiny can the law survive." That's the good news. The bad news is that it's by no means a done deal. This is not the first time Judge Benitez has ruled in support of the Second Amendment. Unfortunately, he lies within the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, often considered the most left-leaning circuit in the country, albeit slightly less so thanks to the appointments of Donald Trump. What will happen is that a panel of the Ninth Circuit may affirm Benitez's decision, but once considered by an en banc proceeding by the full court of 11 justices, they will likely reverse the decision. That could potentially make it a good case for consideration by the U.S. Supreme Court, but that remains to be seen. You may recall that the Supreme Court has already agreed to take one Second Amendment case, specifically for the right to bear arms outside the home, in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Corlett, for which happily my organization, Grassroots North Carolina, has joined the Second Amendment Foundation in filing an amicus brief to rid New Yorkers and the rest of the country of onerous restrictions on bearing arms outside the home. David Chipman. Chipman is Joe Biden's nominee to head the ATF. He's had one confirmation hearing in the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee, and another one will likely come up next week. This is the guy who scoffs at gun ownership, making it clear that he thinks anyone who supports the Second Amendment is a nutcase. The guy who falsely claimed that at Waco, the Branch Davidians being burned out by the ATF he wants to run shot down ATF helicopters with .50 caliber Barrett rifles. Even though no helicopters were shut down, and even though no Barrett rifles were recovered from the scene, and Chipman would know that since he was one of the investigators at that conflagration. This is the guy who worked as a gun control lobbyist for the Giffords Group and also reportedly for anti-gun zealot Michael Bloomberg. This is the guy who, at his first confirmation hearing, said that so-called assault weapons he wants to ban include all semi-automatic rifles with detachable magazines over .22 caliber, which incidentally would include many hunting rifles. And who said he wants not just to enforce the horrendous National Firearms Act, but to expand it. But wait, there's more. It seems the Chipman family has quite a history, including all of the lovely lefty causes they share. John Richardson, blogging at No Lawyers, Only Guns and Money, which, by the way, you can find at onlygunsandmoney.com, has found a treasure trove of information on the Chipman's Facebook pages that they haven't even bothered to remove. What a nice family. Wife Tara proudly displays the orange she wore to celebrate ending gun violence with none other than Michael Bloomberg's Moms Demand Action, the AstroTurf gun control group, and also proudly describes the contributions she has made to Gabby Gifford's gun control organization. After all, hubby was lobbying there to restrict your freedoms. Then we have the photos of David and then-fiancée Tara at Barack Obama's 2019 inaugural ball. After all, in Washington, it pays to have all the right leftist connections. Or what about stepdaughter Allison, with whom David so lovingly poses? There are memorials to leftist Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, of course, but what really stands out front and center, writ large, is Allison's commitment to the Marxist organization calling itself Black Lives Matter. Leftists of a feather and all that, right? Putting David Chipman at the head of the ATF is like nominating Heinrich Himmler to run the SS. There's only one way it can go. So what's likely to happen with the Chipman nomination? Well, let's hear what Larry Keane of the National Shooting Sports Foundation, writing in Guns America Digest, has to say. And I quote, "The Senate's power-sharing agreement would mean that should Chipman's nomination end in a tie at the Senate Judiciary Committee, Chairman Dick Durbin would be required to transmit a notice of the tie to the Secretary of State. That would allow Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer to make a motion to discharge the nomination from the committee, allowing all senators to vote on whether the full Senate should consider the nomination. That could be a litmus test as to where senators would eventually vote, but not necessarily. If the motion to discharge passes, the nomination would then immediately be put on the Senate calendar. That would mean Chipman's nomination would require 50 votes plus one. Given the Senate is split evenly, this would mean Vice President Harris would be the tie-breaking vote. Obviously, if given the chance, she would vote to confirm. Of the votes in play, on the Republican side, we have the perennial rhinos, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska and Susan Collins of Maine. On the Democrat side, we have the senators in play include West Virginia's Joe Manchin, Arizona's Kyrsten Sinema, and Montana's John Tester. Again, register your opposition to Chipman with U.S. senators who will make the decision by going to grnc.org. In our last episode of Guns, Politics, and Freedom, episode 79 to be exact, we discussed the ATF notice of proposed rulemaking which is ostensibly intended to regulate privately made firearms, which they have branded ghost guns. But as is typical of gun control proposals, all is not what it seems. You see, their measure in the proposal would redefine what constitutes a, quote, frame or receiver of a firearm. The problem, as the ATF sees it, is that at present it is entirely plausible that nothing on an AR-15 constitutes a regulatable part. Back in 2019, you see a guy in Los Angeles named Joseph Rowe decided to push the envelope. Although legally making a gun without a serial number requires you to make it entirely by yourself, Rowe set up an operation in which customers could walk in and literally press a single button to make an AR-15, which was neither serialized nor had a background check done. He continued to do this even after warned by ATF agents whom he apparently deliberately allowed to make their own guns, so they arrested him. But the feds ultimately dropped the case. Why? Because if push came to shove, the AR-15 lower receiver, which is the serialized part of the gun, does not meet the definition of a frame or receiver because it does not contain the bolt or bolt carrier. So, here enter the ever-helpful folks at the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, who decide to unilaterally change the definition of frame or receiver. Allow me to read from the ATF summary of the proposed rule. Under the proposed rule, a frame or receiver is any visible housing or holding structure for one or more fire control components. A fire control component is one necessary for the firearm to initiate, complete, or continue the firing sequence, including but not limited to any of the following: hammer, bolt carrier, breech block, cylinder, trigger, firing mechanism, firing pin, striker, or slide rails. More than one externally visible part may house or hold a fire control component on a particular firearm, such as with a split or modular frame or receiver. Under these circumstances, the ATF may determine whether a part or parts of the weapon is the frame or receiver. Now, in the last episode, I pontificated that under the definition of frame or receiver that they want, it could include not only the lower receiver of an AR-15 or other modular guns, which is currently regulated, but also the upper receiver, making it a serialized and regulated component that would have to meet all the laws currently required to transfer a gun, potentially creating a nightmare for owners of the popular rifles, since swapping uppers is one of the things that makes the gun uniquely adaptable to different purposes. Well, I'm going to admit it when I'm wrong. GOA's legal counsel just sent me their interpretation of what the proposal could do, and it doesn't just encompass the upper receiver of AR-15 type guns. It can include 90% of the individual parts of an AR-15, up to and including magazines. It's worse than predicted. The proposal would now put the ATF in the business of regulating individual parts of guns, destroying the firearm industry as it sells parts to customized firearms. Again, folks, register your opposition at grnc.org. Right now, you're listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom. We're going to take a short break, after which we will return with still more critical information enabling you to better defend your gun rights. My name is Paul Vallone. You're listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on Wilmington's Big Talker. Our show is sponsored by Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at hyattguns.com. In this segment of the show, we will discuss the latest proposal from the ATF, this one to regulate AR-15 type pistols. But first, I need to reiterate that you need to do three things to defend your rights, all of which you can do by going to our homepage at grnc.org. First, register your opposition to Biden's viciously anti-gun candidate to head the BATF, namely David Chipman. As noted earlier, Chipman is a leftist with a long history of antipathy toward the Second Amendment. Second, you need to comment with your opposition to the ATF proposal, which would potentially make nearly all of the parts of a common AR-15 part of the frame or receiver, and therefore serialized and restricted as if they were guns. And third, as we are about to describe, we need you to comment against the proposal to turn nearly all AR-15 pistols into highly restricted short-barreled rifles, a proposal that, as you will see, would make accidental felons out of tens of thousands of gun owners who will not be able to figure out how to comply with the law. You can do all that in just a few minutes by going to grnc.org. Well, like barbarians at the gate, the expected ATF Notice of Proposed Rulemaking for Pistol Stabilizing Braces is here, and we need you to comment against it before September 8th. As you may recall, AR-15 pistols and pistol versions of other similar rifles have been made enormously popular due to their smaller size and light weight. There are now an estimated 3 million of these firearms in the hands of Americans. They were first introduced to help our wounded warriors use AR-15 pistols by adding a Velcro strap or other device which is wrapped around the arm to stabilize the gun. Although construed by the ATF to be legal, the Obama administration deigned that putting them to your shoulder constituted, quote, redesigning a gun into an unregistered short-barreled rifle, which is regulated under the National Firearms Act, for which possession is a 10-year federal felony. That's ridiculous, of course, and it's akin to saying that if you decide to brush your teeth with a hairbrush, you have redesigned the hairbrush and made it into a toothbrush. Nevertheless, that was the law of the land until the election of Donald Trump, when the ATF changed its mind and decided that occasional use from the shoulder did not constitute redesign and was therefore legal. As a consequence, sales of AR-15 type pistols skyrocketed. But of course, Joe Biden has never met a gun he wouldn't ban, so the happy compromise would not be allowed to continue. Trouble appeared on the horizon in December when the ATF issued a statement that it would be regulating stabilizing braces by deciding whether or not they constitute an illegal short-barreled rifle based on a ludicrous "I'll know it when I see it" basis under which no gun owner could ever be sure whether or not he was committing a felony. In the ensuing uproar, the ATF backed off, but only long enough to regroup and attack from a different angle. Then in early April, Biden and his gun-hating Attorney General Merrick Garland announced that in weeks they would have proposed regulations for both 80% lowers that people are legally building into guns and for pistol stabilizing braces. Well, that threat is here in the form of notices of proposed rulemaking on which the public may comment. Specifically, two NRPMs, one with a deadline of August 19th and the other by September 8th. You can find links and means of commenting on our homepage at grnc.org. Now, understand that Biden is not using the legislative path designed by the framers, wherein Congress passes laws. Actually, nothing in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution gives the federal government any power to regulate firearms, but we'll save that discussion for another day. Instead, Biden is doing an end run around Congress by using executive fiat to essentially rewrite new gun laws, essentially by reinterpreting the National Firearms Act and the Gun Control Act of 1968. Perhaps the biggest laugh is that the ATF is calling the new criteria objective, when in truth they are anything but. And frankly, you're going to need a lawyer to figure out whether your gun is legal if even they can figure it out. For starters, the proposal reiterates the claim that short-barreled rifles are, quote, dangerous and unusual weapons that need to be regulated, but nobody has ever demonstrated that, making it utterly arbitrary. What they propose to do is to create a point system in which any device accruing 4 or more points is a short-barreled rifle. Of course, when you look up what racks up points, you realize that virtually all AR-15 pistols with braces will exceed 4 points and become, therefore, SBRs, or short-barreled rifles. Even if you accrue only 3 points, you can't say for certain that your gun is legal because the ATF calls that a strong indicator that the weapon is likely designed and intended to be fired from the shoulder. Even 2 points is called a moderate indicator. So if your gun racks up 2 points, are you a felon or not? Who knows? Certainly not you. Also, without bothering to pass new legislation, the ATF proposes to unilaterally change the definition of what constitutes a rifle as follows. And I quote, "The term rifle includes any weapon with a rifled barrel and equipped with an attached stabilizing brace that has objective design features and characteristics that indicate that the firearm is designed to be fired from the shoulder." Translated, that means that that would make stabilizing braces a rifle feature. So if the ATF gets its way, you get to fill out a worksheet, a Form 4999, got to have a form for everything. It looks like a tax form in which, in order to figure out whether your gun is legal. Now, let's take a look at what under the ATF proposal would make your gun illegal by adding up the points it racks up. Let's start with sights. Just about any sights, since after all, the ATF doesn't want you to actually be able to hit anything. Flip-up iron sights, well, that's 1 point toward your allotted 4. Dot or reflex sight, you naughty boy, that gets 2 points. Never mind that in a modern world, people are increasingly using reflex sights on all pistols. Does your gun as configured weigh more than 7.5 pounds or exceed 26 inches in length? You lose. It's a short-barreled rifle, because after all, the ATF will decide how strong you are and consequently what weight of gun you can support. Or how about this one? Depending on the gun's length of pull, it racks up points with a length of pull of 13.5 inches or more, automatically making it an SBR. What's a length of pull? It's the distance from the end of the stock to the trigger. There's only one little problem. A pistol doesn't have a length of pull. That definition is solely for rifles. So now the ATF wants to judge the gun by rifle standards that don't apply to pistols at all, and on that basis make it into something it's not. Under the definition of redundant, see redundant. Other things that rack up points toward making your pistol a short-barreled rifle include whether the brace folds, the type of buffer tube it uses, whether the brace fully or partially envelops the forearm, and much, much more. Oh yes, let's not forget bipods, which get you 2 points since they are not features of a pistol that is designed to be fired with one hand. But of course that's ridiculous since almost nobody has fired handguns with one hand since about 1975. And of course plenty of pistols like the Thompson Contender have been using bipods for decades. After delineating all of the features that supposedly make your pistol an SBR, the ATF proposal helpfully goes on to give examples with photos of guns that can keep their stabilizing brace and those that are short-barreled rifles. Oh, did I forget to mention that in the photos they use, the acceptable versus unacceptable guns are nearly indistinguishable. The result will be that nearly all AR-15 pistols will be reimagined as short-barreled rifles. So, if you own one of the guns the ATF finds to be unacceptable, what would you have to do? Well, option 1 would be to, quote, permanently remove or alter the stabilizing brace such that it cannot be reattached. Now, what that means is anybody's guess, except perhaps not having any stabilizing braces in your possession since they could, in theory, be reattached. Now, how that would jibe with having another gun that qualifies to have a stabilizing brace is also unclear. Option 2 would be to remove the barrel and spend a couple of $100 buying a 16-inch barrel to make it a regular rifle. And now we get to the heart of the matter. Option 3, destroy the gun. Option 4, turn them all in, Mr. and Mrs. America, just like Dianne Feinstein wanted way back in 1994. And option 5 is to register the gun with the ATF as a short-barreled rifle, which will require you to pay $200 for each gun, get fingerprinted, photographed, and go through a ridiculously difficult application process and wait a year or so in the hopes the ATF will approve your gun. If they don't, you would have to go back to options 1 through 4. Now, you must comment in opposition to this fresh new hell from Joe Biden and Merrick Garland, and to make your life easier in so doing, we have created a copy and paste alert on our homepage to allow you to register opposition in just a couple of minutes. Go to grnc.org, that's grnc.org. Right now, you're listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker. After a short break, we will return to discuss Joe Biden's Amerika and what it means for you. My name is Paul Vallone. You are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7, WilmingtonBigTalker.com. Our show is sponsored by Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at HyattGuns.com. First, I want to reiterate that you need to go to grnc.org and respond to 3 alerts. The first one, to oppose the ATF proposal, supposedly for ghost guns, but which would actually create a nightmare for owners of modern modular firearms. Second, to oppose the nomination of rabidly anti-gun David Chipman to head the ATF. And third, to oppose the ATF proposal for pistol stabilizing braces, which would make criminals out of tens of thousands of otherwise law-abiding gun owners. Again, go to grnc.org. That's grnc.org. Only you can stop the Biden administration on its mission to decimate the Second Amendment. Well, this week, Kamala Harris, when a Fox News host called her Kamala, a leftist guest corrected them, saying she pronounced it Kamala. So to me, she is now forevermore Kamala. Anyway, so Kamala went to Guatemala to discuss the border crisis her administration has created. A meeting during which, incidentally, the president of Guatemala blamed the Biden administration for the illegal immigration crisis, but I digress. So at the meeting, Kamala stressed the importance of fixing the root causes, her words, root causes of migration to address the surge of migrants at the southwestern U.S. border. And on this, Kamala or Kamala or whatever she's calling herself, she was telling the truth, albeit perhaps not quite the truth she intended. The Biden administration is indeed addressing the root cause of illegal immigration. People seem to want to come here despite what Kamala and her ilk call systemic racism. People want to come despite so-called white privilege. They want to come despite claims that police are killing minorities. They want to come because we are the fairest, most egalitarian, most prosperous, most upwardly mobile, the best country on the face of the earth. And that is how Kamala and Joe are, quote, addressing the root causes of migration. They know that if they allow millions of uneducated, potentially criminal, illegal aliens, even drug cartels, to come across the southern border, eventually they will turn America into such a crap hole that nobody will want to come. That's how Kamala and Joe are addressing the root causes of migration. Welcome to Joe Biden's America, and we're going to spell that America with a K, where the solutions lie not in bringing other countries up to our standard of living, but by lowering our standard of living to theirs. As but one example, consider the Keystone Pipeline. We closed the Keystone Pipeline here, eliminating thousands of jobs, damaging our energy independence, raising gas prices, raising the cost of living, and then withdraw sanctions to effectively approve the opening of the Russian Nord Stream 2 pipeline, giving the Russians a wedge to drive between us and Europe. Is that doubt you're expressing? Are you saying that the American left couldn't possibly be working to lower our standard of living? Well, that's because, as I have said over and over, you are ill-prepared to deal with the left. Ill-prepared because you are a good person who assumes that because your intentions are good, so are those of others. But the left doesn't have good intentions. The left is drawing its plays straight from Saul Alinsky's playbook, Rules for Radicals. And one of the tenets of those rules is that you can't create the great socialist utopia you want unless you first destroy the existing society. Earlier, we talked about our own little Portland, namely Asheville, and how it has so wrecked its police force that it's no longer able to respond to all 911 calls. How stupid are they, right? Wrong. Hanlon's razor says, and I quote, "Never ascribe to malice that which is adequately explained by incompetence." But in dealing with the left, that principle is reversed. Never ascribe to incompetence that which is adequately explained by malice. I'd like to read you something written by a good friend of mine, John Farnham. John and his wife Vicki run Defense Technologies International, an excellent firearms training school I recommend you look up. But John is also an astute political observer who puts out a little newsletter of what he calls quips. The citizens of Asheville and other Democrat-led cities would do well to listen to this quip. Even I, cynic that I am, didn't think of the motivation behind the left and its agenda to defund police in quite this way. The piece is called Nonviolent 911 Calls, and here it is. and I quote, "Pro-criminal Democrats are now introducing federal legislation to incentivize local communities to dispatch anyone except police to frantic 911 calls. Democrats are doing everything possible to keep their precious violent criminals from getting hurt." Simultaneously, these neo-Marxists couldn't care less about good and decent citizens, of course, because they are neither, and they identify with the former. The real goal is to disarm, marginalize, and eliminate local police. Local police will then be replaced with a new federal national police force that will be completely immune from local control. And they are the ones who will eventually herd us into cattle cars. In the interim, here's what a 911 emergency interchange will soon sound like. 911, are you having a mental health emergency? No, but the violent criminal threatening to kill us and attempting to beat my door down certainly is. I need police here right now. Well, has he actually hurt anyone? Well, not yet, and not for lack of trying. Send the police now. Well, if we send armed police officers, they might hurt someone. So instead, we're sending an unarmed social worker trained in crisis intervention. Unfortunately, social workers don't work after 6 nor on weekends, so we'll try to get one to your home on Monday. When this person actually hurts anyone, call us back, and we'll have this same conversation all over again. Have a nice day, and thanks for calling the Asheville Police Department. Don't laugh too hard. Persuading armed police officers to come in a timely manner and help you during a life-threatening emergency is becoming increasingly difficult, impossible in some venues. Departments are critically understaffed due to defunding, under-equipped, all non-lethal options are being removed, and what few officers remain know and understand that Democrat mayors, governors, and prosecutors just can't wait to charge them with some spectacular headline-generating offense and then throw them into a penitentiary with much political fanfare to the cheers of other Democrats and the media. Thus, responding officers are going to be extremely circumspect and likely take their time getting there, or maybe not respond at all. This is happening in Democrat-controlled metro areas right now, all as violent crime soars. Violent criminals have lost nearly all fear of police. They know Democrat politicians are solidly on their side, and they're right. We'll be hearing soon from these same Democrat politicians that the only solution is a nationwide federal police force over which they have total control. We won't have to wait long, and the cattle cars are next. My name is Paul Vallone. You have been listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7 WilmingtonBigTalker.com, where each Saturday afternoon at 1 p.m. and each Sunday at 5 p.m., we give you the ammunition to better defend your right to keep and bear arms. Please check out our sponsor, Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop, at HyattGuns.com. I also encourage you to check out my website at gunspoliticsandfreedom.com, spell out the and, gunspoliticsandfreedom.com, where you can find both my writings and earlier editions of the show. That's gunspoliticsandfreedom.com. See you next week.